The kettle was warm when I came down at 4:58 in the morning. I didn't see it. I felt it. I've been coming down these stairs in the dark for 31 years, and my hand knows where that stove is, the way your foot knows the last step. I laid my palm on the side of that kettle before I ever reached for the light switch, and it was warm. Not hot. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. Hot is when you can't leave your hand on it. Warm is about 20 minutes after. 20 minutes, maybe 25 in a cold kitchen. And that kitchen was cold because I keep the thermostat at 62 overnight, and always have. I stood there a second with my hand on it. Then I turned on the light. The burner ring was cold. I put my whole hand flat on it, fingers spread, the way you'd check a child for fever, and it was cold as the counter. No scorch on it. No little ring of dried out water where a pot boiled over, and the kettle wasn't on the back burner where I keep it. It was sitting on the front one, on the cold one, square in the middle, like somebody had set it down careful. I have lived alone in this house since 1998. I checked the front room first. My purse was on the chair by the door where I leave it, and my wallet was in it, and the $11 I had was still folded inside. The television was there. My mother's clock was on the shelf. I went through the dining room I don't use, and the bathroom off the hall, and the back bedroom, and there wasn't one thing out of place in any of them. Then I went to the back door. The storm door was latched. The wooden door behind it was closed, and the deadbolt was not thrown. I have thrown that deadbolt every night since Ray took his suitcases out to the car. That is not a habit I picked up recently, and it isn't something I do when I remember to. It's the last thing I do before I go up, every single night, the way some people say a prayer. I stood there in my housecoat, looking at that little brass tab lying sideways, and I put my thumb on it and turned it, and it went over with that sound it makes. Then I made my tea. I called Dale at 7:10. That's early for him. But he's up, he does service calls out of Mount Vernon, and he's in the truck by 7:30. I told him what I found. The kettle, the burner, the bolt. He was quiet about 2 seconds, and then he said it in that voice. "Mom, you're sure you didn't get up?" Now I know my son. He wasn't being cruel. He was standing in his kitchen with his coffee and his boots half on, and I'd handed him a thing with no explanation in it, and he reached for the nearest one he could find. The nearest one was me. I could have argued. I've thought about that a lot since. But you can't argue your way out of that, not once somebody's said it out loud, because the arguing is the proof. So I said, well, maybe. Maybe I did and don't recall. He said everybody does that. He leaves his own truck running at the shop twice a week, and I laughed for him. He said he'd try to get out and see me soon, and we hung up. He hadn't been out since October. You ought to know where I am, because it explains some things. My house sits at the end of a gravel drive, about 200 feet off Dutch Hollow Road, out past Danville. There's a barn behind it. I haven't put anything in since the year Ray left. Across the road and up a little, Dot Hirschberger keeps a porch light burning all night. And past her, there's nothing for half a mile in either direction but corn stubble and a stand of walnut trees. Nobody comes down my drive who isn't coming to see me. Wade came at 2 that afternoon, and I wasn't expecting him. He backed his dump truck up my drive with that beeping it does and dropped a load of gravel at the low spot by the culvert, where the rain washes it out every February. He hadn't called. He hadn't asked. He just came, with his hood up, and it was 29 degrees out with a wind coming across from the Hirschberger place that would cut you. I stood at the storm door and watched him rake it out by hand. He was at it a good hour. 44 years old, and I could still see the shape of him at 15, in the way he worked all shoulders, mad at the ground. When he came in, his face was red, and his hands didn't want to close all the way. I told him about the kettle while I was getting the pan out. He set his hat down. He asked if the doors were locked. He asked if anything was gone. He asked whether I'd checked upstairs, and I said there's nothing up there but me. He looked at that back door a while, the way a man looks at something he's thinking about fixing. You ought to tell Dale about that, he said, just so somebody knows. I already did. Good, that's good. Then I made him fried bologna sandwiches, the way his mother used to, with the little cuts in the edges so it doesn't cup up in the pan, and mustard and white bread. He ate two standing at the counter, and then sat down and ate a third. You didn't have to do that drive, I said. It's going to wash out. It washes out every year. Well, he said, this year it ain't. June's been gone 14 years, when she was still with us and things were bad at that house. Wade slept in my back bedroom from the time he was 14 until he was 17. He came up my porch steps that first night with his clothes in a trash bag, and I have never once said a word to him about that bag, and I never will. Before he left. And I remember this because of how ordinary it was. He asked if I'd mind a driver of his coming to the barn some mornings. The county garage gate down in Howard doesn't open till 6, and he's got a man who needs to be rolling before that. I said, of course not, before he got the whole sentence out. I'll be honest about why. When you've been retired 6 years, and your husband's in Florida, and your son calls every third Sunday and somebody asks you for something, anything, the use of a barn, a place to put a truck, there's a part of you that stands up straighter. I carried mail on Route 4 for 26 years out of the Danville post office. For 26 years, I was the woman who knew where every person on that road lived, and who was sick, and whose boy was coming home. Now I know what day the trash goes out. So when Wade asks me for something, I say yes. That's not a mystery. That's arithmetic. He'd been getting his business mail at my box for 2 years by then, since he lost the lease on the shop off 62. That had been the same kind of conversation. A little mail, he said. I said, sure. He left around 4. I watched his taillights go up the drive and turn. That evening I got out the notebook. There's a spiral notebook in my kitchen drawer, and before that one there were 40, some others, and I've been keeping them since 1994. On the route you write everything down. Vacations, holds, forwards, dogs, which boxes are frozen shut, which house has somebody new in it. You do that for 26 years, and you don't stop just because they take the truck away. I wrote, February 9th, 4:58 a.m. Kettle warm, front burner, ring cold, back bolt open. Then I sat and looked at it, because there wasn't anything else to write. Then I went up to bed. The next afternoon I walked down for the mail. It was 2:10. I want to be exact about that. Route 4 runs Dutch Hollow between 1:15 and 1:40, and there is nothing on God's earth that changes it, not weather, not Christmas, not a substitute. I know, because I ran that road myself, and I trained the man who runs it now. I opened the box and it was empty. I stood there a minute. Then I stepped back and looked at the whole thing, the post, and the box, and the number, and that's when I saw the little red flag standing straight up on the side. I hadn't put anything in that box. I hadn't raised that flag. Somebody had left something in my mailbox going out. I put the flag down and walked back up the drive with nothing in my hands. The next day I put my coat on at 1:10 and stood at the end of that drive in the wind and waited. Curtis Beale came through at 1:26. He's got 12 years on the route now. He slowed when he saw me standing there and rolled the window down and said, Miss Rennie, the way he said it since he was a young man with a bad haircut riding along with me. I asked him if he'd run Dutch Hollow the day before. He said he had. I asked if he'd put anything in my box. He thought about it. He does that he's careful, which is why I picked him. He said yes, 4 or 5 pieces. Something for the hauling company, one of those long white ones, and a magazine. He asked was something missing. I told him no. I told him I'd gotten mixed up on the days. He said, well, if you turn up short, you let me know. Then he pulled off, and I stood there a while after he was gone. So, there it was. It wasn't that the mail hadn't come. The mail had come and gone. I watched that box 3 days. 2 of those days it was empty by the time I got down there, and both times I made myself wait until 2:15, and both times the door was hanging open, and there was nothing in it. Curtis never missed a day in his life. The third day there was mail. 7 pieces. I carried them up to the kitchen table and laid them out, because that's what I know how to do. A window envelope for Kimball Site and Hall. A fuel card statement for Kimball Site and Hall. A parts catalogue, thick as a phone book, for Kimball Site and Hall. A plate renewal notice from the state of Ohio for a vehicle I have never laid eyes on. At my address, 2 more window envelopes, and a flyer for a tire place in Utica addressed to occupant, which was the only piece in that stack that had anything to do with me. Nothing of mine, not one thing. 2 years ago he'd asked me for a little mail. A little mail is what you carry in one hand. 7 pieces in a day is a business, and I know what a business looks like in a box, because I delivered to them. I know what it means when a residential box starts running commercial volume. It means somebody is operating out of that address. I stacked them square, the way you band a bundle, and set them on the corner of the table. Then I sat down with my hands flat on either side of that stack, because I'd like to say I was blindsided, and I wasn't. I said yes to every piece of it, out loud, in this kitchen. The winter before last, we got 11 inches on a Tuesday. I was 71 hours without my drive being touched, and had about decided to call somebody when I heard the skid steer at 4 in the morning. He had customers waiting on him, real ones, paying ones, with parking lots that had to be open at 6, and he came here first. He wouldn't take a dime for it. He wouldn't take a dime for the gravel either, not that load, and not the 2 before it. I picked up that plate renewal notice again and read it through. It was for a 2011 Peterbilt triaxle. Ohio apportioned plates. Registered address, 14710 Dutch Hollow Road. I have never in my life seen a 2011 Peterbilt on this property. I set it back down on the stack. And the last night of June's life, in that room at Knox Community with the light off and the door half open, my sister took hold of my wrist harder than a woman that's sick ought to have been able to, and made me tell her I wouldn't let Wade go under. He was 30 then. He'd already had one business fail. I said I wouldn't, and I meant it, and I have never once considered that a burden. I want that understood. But there's a plainer part, and I may as well say it, since nobody's listening. Wade calls me every Sunday. Dale calls every third one. That's the whole arithmetic of my week, and I know which side of it does the calling. That Thursday, the 12th, I came down at 10 till 5, and the kettle was warm again. I'd been half expecting it, and that didn't do a thing for me. On the front burner again, the ring cold again. But there was more that morning, and it was worse for being small. The guest towel in the back bathroom was damp and folded and hung crooked on the bar. There was hair in the shower, drain black and short, and mine has been grey since I was 50. There was a ring of coffee on the counter by the sink, one ring wiped at and missed. My coffee can had been opened and set back with the lid loose. And that kettle sitting on the cold burner, exactly the way I found it the first time, set down careful, in the middle. That's the part that stayed with me, and I couldn't have told you why yet. Somebody had used my kitchen and then put things back not where they went, but where they thought they went, and had gone to some trouble about it. Saturday, Brody came. Shanna drops him around 10 and picks him up at 3, and he's 9, and he has decided that his job in this house is the kettle. I don't know where he got that. He gets the step stool without being asked, and fills it at the tap, and watches that burner like it's going to do something. You have to stay with it, I told him. I know. You don't walk off, not even to the other room. I know, Aunt Rennie. He didn't know. He walked off twice that morning, and both times I sent him back. But when it went, he took it off the heat himself with both hands, arms locked out straight, tongue between his teeth, carrying it like something that might wake up. He set it on the trivet and let out a breath. "That's how," I said. He looked so pleased with himself. I had to turn around and get the cups down so he wouldn't see my face. We had tea with too much sugar in it, and he told me about a boy at school who eats paper, and around noon he asked if his dad's trucks were in my barn. I said no, honey. He said okay, and that was that. He's 9. He was thinking about the paper boy. Wade came out that evening after Shanna picked Brody up, and I asked him straight out. He didn't flinch. He didn't even set his cup down. He said, his man's been picking up a truck from the barn some mornings. That's the driver he'd mentioned. And there's a bathroom off the back and coffee in the cupboard. And he'd told him to help himself. He said it like a man who'd forgotten to mention he borrowed a rake. "I meant to tell you," he said. "That's on me." I said I'd have liked knowing there was a man in my house at 5 in the morning. And he looked up at me then, and his face did something I have gone back over more times than I can count, because it was gentle. There was not one hard thing in it. "Aunt Rennie," he said, "you told me it was fine, Thanksgiving, right there in the kitchen, after the pie. Don't you remember that?" I said something, I don't recall what. "I have been in this kitchen at Thanksgiving with 11 people in it, and every burner going, and Shanna's mother talking at me about her knee. And pie. Yes. And Wade at the sink, because he's the only one of them who ever picks up a towel. I can see all of it. And there is no reason on this earth that a 2-minute conversation about a barn ought to have printed itself on me. So I couldn't say he was wrong. I could only say I didn't have it. That's not the same thing. But you try holding those two apart at 4 in the morning. That night, I checked the burner before I went up. Then I stopped on the stairs and came back and checked it again, with the light off, standing in the doorway. And at midnight I got out of bed and came down in my housecoat and put my hand flat on that ring and held it there long enough to count. Because I had gotten to where I didn't trust what I'd seen 20 minutes earlier. That's what it does. It isn't the forgetting, it's the checking. The next morning I got out every notebook in the bottom of that drawer and read my own handwriting backward for 2 hours. 1997, 2003, 2014, hold at the Millers till the 11th, dog loose at the Ferguson place, new people in at 12:2:20, forward on Delaney to Zanesville. Same slant, same little cramped letters, same as it ever was. Nothing wandering in it anywhere. It didn't settle a thing. That isn't how the fear works. A woman losing her mind can still write a neat hand. That Sunday, I walked over to Dot's. Dot Hirschberger is 74 and has lived across that road since before I got here. And we sat on her enclosed porch with the space heater going and talked about the deer getting into her hostas and her granddaughter's wedding in Dublin in June. And whether they'll ever fix the culvert at the county line. Ordinary. It was the first hour I'd had in 2 weeks, where nothing in my chest was doing anything. Then she said, stirring her coffee, "Somebody's coming down your drive early. I see the lights. 4:30, thereabouts." I said that was Wade's driver. She said. And then, kind as anything, the way you'd pass somebody, the cream. "Well, Wade asked me back before Thanksgiving to look in on you now and again. Said you'd been a little turned around." I sat on that porch another 20 minutes. I don't know what we talked about. Before Thanksgiving. That evening the phone rang, and it was Dale, and there was a rustling on his end like he was holding something. "Mom," he said, "why is your mail coming to my house?" I asked what he was talking about. "I've got your pharmacy statement. I've got your credit union quarterly, and there's a notice here from the post office on top of it. Paper moving. It says you moved. January 22nd. I was standing in my kitchen. I had been standing in that kitchen for 31 years. "Read it to me," I said. "Mum." "Dale, Read me the notice. He read it. It was the standard one, the confirmation they send out, and I knew the shape of it before he was 3 lines in, because I have handed thousands of them across counters and stuffed thousands more into boxes. He read me the name, which was Loretta Vance. He read me the old address, which was mine. He read me the new address, which was his, in Mount Vernon, on Coshocton Avenue. Read me the date again. January 22nd. Does it say temporary or permanent? He was quiet a second. It says permanent. I had the notebook open by then, and the pen in my hand, and I wrote it down while he was still talking. My handwriting came out the same as it always does. How long have you had my mail? I don't, a couple weeks. How many? 2, maybe 3. Then, quieter. There was one came the first week of February. Your dentist, I think. I texted Wade about it. You texted Wade. He said you probably filled out one of those forms yourself and forgot. He said you'd been... He stopped. I let him stop. And then he finished it anyway, because Dale has never in his life been able to leave a sentence lying there. He said you'd been having some trouble with things like that. And you didn't call me. I figured he'd know. He's out there more than I am. That was true. That was the truest thing my son said on the phone that night, and neither one of us wanted it. I told him to hold on to all of it. I thanked him, and I hung up. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator came on. I sat there with the notebook open and my hand still on it, and did not move for a good while. The next morning I called him back. One question, I said. When did Wade first say something to you about my memory? Mom, I'm not upset. I want the month. He thought about it. He wanted to be helpful. That's the thing about Dale. He's not a hard man. He's a man who takes the road with the fewest turns in it. Christmas, he said. He mentioned you'd repeated yourself a couple times at Christmas. Then, warming to it, glad to have something useful. Well, before that, really. He called me around Thanksgiving. Said he'd noticed a few things. I thanked him and said I'd talk to him Sunday. Then I sat down and wrote 2 dates in the notebook, one under the other. November, February. I looked at those 2 lines, a long time. Because here is what I'd been carrying around for 2 weeks. It had been heavy, but it had at least been simple. Something happened, and people started to wonder about me. That's a bad thing, but it's an ordinary bad thing. That happens to a woman of 69 in the natural course of getting old, and I'd been fighting it the way you fight weather. But November came first. Nothing happened in November. There was no kettle in November. There was no empty box, no damp towel, no black hair in a drain. In November, I was in this house, doing exactly what I'd been doing for 6 years. And there was not one single solitary thing for anybody on God's earth to notice about me. He didn't start saying it because he'd seen something. He started saying it before there was anything to see. I want to describe what that felt like, and I'm not sure I can. It wasn't anger. Anger came later, and it came smaller than you'd think. It was more like the feeling you get when you find out a room you've been sitting in has another door in it. Every kind thing anybody had said to me since Christmas got up and turned around and looked at me. Dale on the phone. You're sure you didn't get up? Wade at my counter. Gentle as a hand on your arm, you told me it was fine. Don't you remember? Dot with her coffee spoon a little turned around. Somebody had gone out ahead of me and swept the road. I got up and put water on because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. And while it heated, I worked out the rest of it standing at that stove. That form was not filed to keep my mail from me. If somebody wanted my pharmacy statements, they'd have taken them out of the box and burned them, and nobody would have known for a year. That form sent my mail to my son. My son, the one man in the county certain to open it and certain to say something. No, that form wasn't about what came to me. It was about what was left behind. It emptied that box of me. It took Loretta Vance off 14710 Dutch Hollow Road, so that anybody who checked, anybody who sent a letter, Anybody who looked up who lived there would find one name attached to that address, and it would not be mine. And the flag. I set the kettle down and stood there. That flag had been up on a day when I hadn't put a thing in the box. I'd been walking around that for 2 weeks like it was a riddle, and it isn't a riddle at all. I'd have seen it in 10 seconds when I was working. Mail goes both directions. Anybody can put anything in a rural box going out, and the carrier will take it. A form goes in that box with a stamp on it, and by Thursday it's in Memphis, and by the 22nd it's law. They used my own mailbox to move me out of my own house. I went and opened the back bedroom. I hadn't been in it since fall. I used to knock on that door when Wade was in there, 16 years old and furious at everything, and I'd stand in the hall with my hand up like a woman at a stranger's house. And he'd say, "What?" and I'd say, "Supper." There were 2 work shirts on hangers on the closet door. Navy blue, the collar shot on both. A phone charger plugged into the outlet by the bed. Cord run under the nightstand so nobody'd trip it. A pair of work boots by the bed, set side by side, laces tucked in. I picked one up. They were beat to death, and somebody had oiled them anyway. And when I turned it over and looked at the tongue, the size stamped in it was a 9. Wade wears a 13. I know that the way I know my own shoe size, because I bought him his first pair of steel toes at Ganley's in the fall of '98 when he got on with a roofing crew. $62. I remember standing at that register thinking, $62. So it wasn't Wade in my kitchen. I set the boot back exactly where it had been, toe to toe with the other one. Laces tucked in, set square. The way a man leaves them when he means to put them back on in that room in the morning. That's when I saw the photograph taped inside the closet door. 2 little girls, school pictures, the cheap kind with the blue swirl behind them, cut apart and taped up side by side. One about 6 with her front teeth gone. One smaller, maybe 4, with a Barrett in and her chin down like she'd been told to hold still. I did not know those children. I had never seen those children in my life. And somebody had stood in this room, in my house, and taken the trouble to tape them up where he'd see them. I want to say something about what was actually at risk, because up till then, I'd been thinking about my name the way you think about your name, as a feeling, as whether people take you serious. It isn't only that. This house is mine. It's in my name, and has been since 1995. The barn is on it. The drive is on it. And every wheel that turns in that barn goes out under my number, down my gravel, onto that road. I carried mail past enough accidents in 26 years to know that when something goes wrong out there, the first thing anybody does is find out where it started from. And where it started from is a mailbox with 14710 on it, and a woman who told a man on the telephone, "Sure, honey, of course." I stood in that hallway with my hand on the doorframe and thought, I have been letting a business live in my house for 2 years, and I do not know one single thing about it. I went and got the phone. I got as far as his name in the list. My thumb was on it. And I'll be honest here, because that half-minute is the closest the whole thing came to going the other way. I wanted him to explain it. That's what I wanted. I wanted him to come sit at my table and say something reasonable in that voice. Something about the county garage and the gate, and how he meant to tell me, and I wanted to be able to take it. Taking it is what I have done for 14 years, and it has never once cost me a thing I could name. And I knew, standing in that hall with the phone lit up in my hand, that the explanation would be good. He is not a stupid man. It would be good, and it would have some truth in it, and I would take it, and then I would go to bed. I put the phone face down on the dresser. Then I went in to strip that bed, because you can't leave a bed like that. I pulled the quilt back. The sheets were not mine. They were grey. Jersey. The stretchy kind, and I have never owned a grey sheet in my life. Somebody had brought his own bedding into my house. But the pillowcase was mine. Cream, with the blue stitching down the hem. Out of the set my mother gave me. And there is exactly one place in this house those live. That's the linen closet at the top of my stairs, 6 feet from the door of the room where I sleep. I stood at the top of my own stairs the next morning and opened that closet like it belonged to somebody else. The set was there. 2 flat, 2 fitted, 3 cases, 1 case gone. Then I went down and put the coffee on and got out the notebook and started doing the only thing I have ever been any good at. You have to understand that none of what came next was clever. People want a story where somebody figures something out. I didn't figure anything out. I just knew the business, the way a farmer knows what a cloud is going to do, and that isn't wisdom. It's 26 years. A change of address takes a name, an address, and a form. That's all. That form doesn't have to be handed to anybody. It can go in any box in Knox County with a stamp on the flap, and the carrier will take it, because that's the job. You take what's in the box. There's a validation letter that goes out after. And here's the thing that had been sitting in front of me for 2 weeks. That letter goes to the old address. It goes back to the house you supposedly left, so that if you didn't file it, you'd know. It came here. Sometime between the 22nd and the end of the month, that letter came to this box on Dutch Hollow and went out of it again in somebody's hand. Before I ever walked down the drive, which meant it wasn't sloppiness. Somebody knew that letter was coming and came for it. And you cannot undo one over the telephone. You stand there in person with your license in your hand. I wrote that down too. Not because I'd forget, because writing it down is what I do instead of pacing. Then I quit trying to catch anybody. That's what I'd been doing, and it was foolish, and I could see it once I put it on paper, sitting up half the night listening. Walking down at 2:10 like I was going to surprise somebody, that isn't work. That's worry, with its coat on. So I did the work instead. Wednesday, I left my own mail in the box. 2 pieces, an electric bill and a coupon book, and I set them in with the Kimball mail and closed the door and went up to the house and wrote down what was in there, piece by piece. Thursday morning at 8, I walked down. My electric bill was there. The coupon book was there. Every single thing with Kimball's site and Hall on it was gone. I wrote, February 18th, mine left, theirs taken. Friday, the same. I wrote down the mornings too. The 19th, nothing. The 20th, kettle warm, 4:52, front burner, coffee can moved. There's a thing that happens when you start keeping a record instead of a grudge. It gets quiet. I slept those 2 nights not well, but I slept. Because a thing on paper is a thing that isn't only in your head anymore, and there was nobody left I could hand it to, so it may as well hold still. Saturday, February 21st, I set my alarm for 4. I made my tea at 1:15 and did not turn on any light. I carried the cup to the chair by the pantry door, which is the one place in that kitchen where you're behind the swing of the back door and out of the line of the window over the sink. I sat down in my coat with the cup on my knee. It was cold in there. I hadn't touched the thermostat. 4:25, 4:30. Headlights came off Dutch Hollow and swung up my gravel and went out, and there was no engine sound after, because he'd cut it and coasted the last of it. And I understood he'd been doing that a while. 4:38, a key went into my back door. I heard him take his boots off on the mat. I heard him blow into his hands and a low sound in his throat at the cold of my kitchen. And then, to nobody, easy as breathing, the way you talk to a house you believe is asleep. Buenos dias, señora. He got the kettle off the back burner and filled it at the tap and set it on the front one and turned the knob, and the burner ticked and caught. Then I reached over and turned on the light. I will not forget his face as long as I live. He was a young man, 30-some, in a Carhartt coat, hair flat on one side from the truck seat. He had my kettle in his hand. And what happened to his face was not the face of a man who's been caught. It was the face of a man who has just found out the floor is not where he thought it was. He said something in Spanish, very quiet. Then he set the kettle on the counter and put both hands up, empty, at about the height of his chest, and stood absolutely still. Senora, Senora, I'm sorry, he said. Sit down, I said. I'm sorry. Sit down. You're going to burn the bottom out of that. I got up and turned the burner off and moved the kettle onto the ring, and my hands were shaking, and his were too. His name is Cesar Ocampo. He drives for Wade. He's been driving for him since last spring. He thought I knew. That's the first thing he said once he could get a sentence out, and he said it about 4 times. He thought I knew. He'd been told I knew. And then he told me what he'd been told, and he told it plain, because he had no idea in this world what he was handing me. He'd been told the lady in the house was Wade's aunt, and that she was not always sure what day it was, that mornings should be kept quiet so as not to upset her. That if she came down and seemed confused, don't argue with her. Just go on out to the barn. That is why he washed the cup. That is why he wiped the counter. That is why he'd been trying, every single morning, to leave that kitchen exactly the way he found it, so a confused old woman wouldn't come down and be frightened by something she couldn't explain. He drives in from Newark, 55 minutes each way. The county gate down at Howard doesn't come up till 6, and Wade told him, use the house, there's coffee in the cupboard, there's a bathroom off the back, help yourself. He said he tried not to use anything. He said he brought his own coffee twice and then stopped, because it felt worse somehow than using ours. And in January there were 2 night halls that put him in at 1 in the morning with a 5 o'clock load, and Wade told him to just stay, use the back room. So he did. Twice. He said he wasn't going to sleep in a woman's sheets, so he brought his own out of the truck. And the pillowcase, I said. He looked at the floor. There was no pillow with a case on it. I looked in the closet upstairs. He stopped and started over. That was wrong. That was the wrongest thing I did. The trouble I was having was that I could not get any of it to sit where I wanted it. Every single thing that man did in my house, he did to be decent. He took his boots off. He oiled his own boots. He wiped a counter he didn't have to wipe. And every one of those small decencies was a piece of what had been done to me. Because a man doesn't tiptoe around a woman who has her wits about her. He tiptoes around the woman he's been told about. He'd been taking care not to upset me. That was the whole shape of it, sitting in my kitchen in a Carhartt coat. I asked to see the key. He put it on the table. It was my spare, and there was a wrap of yellow electrical tape around the head of it, and I put that tape on in 2011 so I could tell it from the barn key in the drawer. I made him coffee. He tried to say no, and I told him to sit down again, and he sat. And I want to say that the 11 minutes that man spent at my table were the warmest 11 minutes I'd had in that kitchen since Christmas. I know how that sounds. The 2 little girls in the back room are his, Marisol 6 and Yesenia 4. He got the phone out and showed me a picture of the little one asleep on a laundry basket, and I laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. He didn't ask me one question about myself, and I was grateful for it. He told me 2 things about the work, and he told them the way a man tells you about the weather. The first was that there's a fellow coming out Thursday to look at the barn. The second was, the boss says the truck's got to live out in the country now, and then, going for his coat, ordinary as anything. It's been rough on him since the wreck. 1.5 years ago, one of the trucks clipped a car on 62. Nobody got hurt, gracias a Dios. But that's when the insurance went sideways. He knocked twice on my table with his knuckles. I got up and put his cup in the sink so he wouldn't see my face. Because that was the floor going out from under me the second time in one morning, and this one was worse than the first. And it had nothing at all to do with my name or my mail or my sheets. A man was coming Thursday to ask a question about where those trucks sleep, and a truck that had already put a car in a ditch one time was going to be in the answer. And the answer he was coming to get was going to come out of my mouth. In my kitchen, in my house, about my barn. Caesar apologized twice more at the door and called me Senora both times, and went out to the barn and took the truck out at 10 after 5. I stood at the window and watched him go down the drive with his lights off until he hit the road. At 9 o'clock, I drove into Danville. The post office opens at 9. I parked in the same spot. I parked in for 26 years, and I went in the front instead of the side, which felt like a thing. Gil Meeker was on the counter. Gil's 58 now, and I trained him in the fall of 99. He came out from behind the counter and hugged me and asked about Dale and about my hip. And I asked about his mother, who is 91 and still driving, which is a problem for the whole east side of that town. Then I said I needed to ask him one thing, and I needed a straight answer. There's a permanent forwarding order on file for Loretta Vance at 14710 Dutch Hollow Road, effective January 22nd. I knew that already. Dale had read it to me. What I could not know from my own kitchen was the one thing I asked him. Was it filed in person? Gil turned to the screen. He looked at it a while. Then he said, "No." He didn't say anything else. Gil's a good man, and he's not a fool, and he could see my face, but he didn't ask me one question, and he didn't offer me one opinion. And I have thought since that it was the kindest thing anybody did for me in the whole business. I asked him for the form by number. He got it out from under the counter. I put my driver's license down on that steel and filled it out standing up, at the counter where I cased mail for 26 years, and I signed my name. Loretta Vance, 14710 Dutch Hollow Road. Put me back. Gil stamped it and told me it'd take a few days to work through, and I said I knew how long it took. He laughed. I didn't, particularly. From there I went to the hardware in Howard and bought a deadbolt, the good one, $38, and 2 extra keys cut off the blank in the box. That back door frame has been out of square since the Reagan administration. It took me an hour and a half, and I ruined the paint, and I had to go at the mortise with a chisel and a hammer and stop twice to rest my hands. Ray never fixed a thing in this house. I have set 3 locks in it since 1998, and this was the 4th. When it was in, I stood on the step and turned the key both ways and pushed on the door, and it didn't move. 2 keys. I put them both in my coat pocket. Then I went inside and did not call anybody. Not Dale, not Dot, not Gil, not Wade. That was the whole of it, right there. And it was the hardest part. Every hour of the next 3 days, there was a voice in me saying, "Tell somebody." And the voice wanted me to tell Wade most of all. Because telling Wade would have made it an argument. And an argument is a thing where somebody talks you out of something. I let the mail come instead. Sunday afternoon, the 22nd, the phone buzzed on the table. Aunt Rennie need a favor. Insurance fellas coming out Thursday to look at the barn for the renewal. All you gotta say is the trucks live here. That's all. Love you. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down and looked out the window at that box down at the end of my drive. Filling up all week with envelopes for a company that doesn't live here, that nobody was coming to collect anymore, because the man who used to collect them takes his boots off at my door and calls me Senora. I didn't answer it. Wednesday morning, his truck came up my gravel at 20 after 7. I was at the sink, and I heard him park, and I heard the door and his boots on the step. Then I heard him try the handle. And then there was that half second where a man stops and looks at his own hand. Then he knocked. I let him stand out there a second longer than I needed to. Not to be cruel. I just wanted to see it. A grown man knocking on a door he has walked through since he was 14 years old. I wanted it to be a real thing that happened, and not something I imagined later. Then I opened it. "Hey," he said, "lock stick on you?" "It's new." He looked at it. He's in the trades. He knew inside of 2 seconds it wasn't the old one, and that somebody had been at that frame with a chisel. He didn't say anything about it. I come out to get the barn straightened up before Thursday. There's pallets and stuff in there. Come in the kitchen a minute. I filled the kettle and set it on the front burner and got 2 cups down. He sat at the table with his coat still on and his hat in his hand, and he said something about the weather turning, and I let the water go. I poured us both a cup and sat down across from him and opened the notebook. February 9th, I said. 4:58 in the morning. Kettle warm on the front burner, ring cold, back bolt open. Aunt Rennie. February 12th. Kettle warm, towel damp, coffee ring on the counter, hair in the shower drain that isn't mine. He set the hat down. February 21st. 4:38 in the morning. A man came in my back door with a key that has yellow tape on it. Size 9, boot. 2 little girls taped inside the closet door of the room you slept in when you were 15. He wasn't supposed to. January 22nd, I turned the page. A change of address in my name. Permanent. Sending my mail to Dale's. Went out of my own box with the flag up. I never signed it, and I never filled one out, and it was not filed in person. I know that because I asked at the counter with my license in my hand. He was looking at the table. I closed the notebook and put my hand on it. I've got one question, I said. When did you tell Dale I was slipping before the kettle? Or after? November, he said. Just like that. Out ahead of himself, the way you answer when your aunt asks you what time something was, because that's how she asked it. Plain. Like it's a date on a work order. And then I watched him hear it. He sat back in the chair. He didn't say anything for a while, and the refrigerator came on, and neither one of us drank any tea. There wasn't anything in November, Wade. No, there wasn't anything until February. So you weren't telling people what you'd seen. You were telling them what they'd need to think later. He put both hands flat on the table. It's an address, he said. That's all it ever was. It's a place for mail. You weren't using it for anything. I live here. You know what I mean. He wasn't loud. That's the thing I want understood. He has never once in his life raised his voice in this house. Aunt Rennie, the insurance company don't care where a truck physically sits. They don't. It's a box on a form. Nobody's hurt by it. Nobody's out anything. Then why did I have to be confused? He didn't answer that. Brody's got $1,800 of orthodontia coming this summer, he said. You know what a set of tires runs now? $2,200 for one truck. I know. I've got a man with 2 little girls depending on me having work in April. He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. Then he looked up, and there it was. Mom made you promise. I let that sit between us. I have thought about that a long time since, and I'll tell you what I think. He didn't say it to be low. He said it because it had worked every single time he'd ever needed it to, for 14 years. And a man reaches for the tool that's always been in the box. I didn't pick it up. I left it lying on the table and let him look at it. He got up then. Not toward me, he went 2 steps to the counter and stood with his back to me and his hands on the edge of it. Caesar was never going to say anything, he said. He thought you were... And he stopped. He thought I was what? I said. He didn't turn around. He thought I was a confused old woman, I said. That's what you told him. That's why he wiped my counter every single morning, Wade. That boy has been in my house at 5 in the morning for 6 weeks being gentle with me. The refrigerator shut off. You didn't just borrow my address, I said. You couldn't use it until you'd spent my name. Dale. That boy. You went around this county in November and paid out my name a little at a time to buy yourself a mailbox. He stood at that counter a long while. Then I told him the rest of it. And I told it the way you read a route sheet, because I didn't have anything left in me for any other way. I won't be here Thursday, I said, and neither will your trucks. What you tell that man is your business. It just won't be my kitchen, he hears it in. He turned around. The barn's clear by Friday. You've got 2 days. I'll leave the barn key on the step, and you can bring it back through the mail slot when you're done. because you're not keeping one, and neither is anybody else. That lock you couldn't work this morning is the reason why. Aunt Rennie, the forwarding order came off Saturday morning. My name's back on that box. Anything of yours that lands in it from here on goes back up under the flag, marked, and Curtis will take it, and it'll go back where it came from. I looked at him. I'm not calling anybody, Wade. I'm not reporting you to one living soul. I'm correcting an address. That's what I did for a living for 26 years. He came back to the table, but he didn't sit down. Thursday, he said. Thursday's the renewal, and then he started doing it out loud. If I don't have the county address, then the okay. The plates are all no. The plates run to here. They run to here. So that's... He stopped and started again from a different end. Coshocton's got the local preference on the site package, and they want the certificate in force by the 20th. So if the renewal don't come back till... He quit in the middle of it. He looked up at the ceiling, then he sat down. He looked 44, and he looked done. I have seen that face on men at the end of a bad harvest, and I saw it on Ray in 1997, and I did not enjoy seeing it on June's boy at my own table. You're going to cost me Coshocton, he said. Wade. I waited till he looked at me. I want to say one thing, and then I want you to go. And I want you to hear it, because you're going to tell it to yourself wrong for a long time, and I'd like the true version to be out there somewhere. I'm not doing this over a mailbox. You could have had my mailbox till the day I die. I'd have given you the barn, and I'd have given you the key, and I'd have never asked you for a dime. And you know that, because you knew it in November. That's why what you did makes me sick. There's a man coming here Thursday to ask where those trucks sleep. And 1.5 years ago, one of them put a car in a ditch on 62. Nobody has asked me one thing about any of that, and I have been the address on it for 2 years. I put my hand flat on the notebook. I'm 69 years old, and there is not one thing in this world I own but this house and my name on it. I'll not put my mouth on that answer. Not for you. Not for Brody. Not for June. He sat there. The gravel's yours, I said. If you want to come dig it out of my drive, you come ahead. I won't stand in your way. He didn't answer that. He picked up his hat and turned it over once. At the door, he stopped with his hand on it, and he didn't look back at me. You used to knock, he said. I did, I said. Then he went out. He stood down in that drive with the truck door open, one hand up on the top of it, looking off toward the Hirschberger place. And it went on long enough that I understood he wasn't working out what to say to me. He was working out where to go. Then he got in and backed down the gravel and turned onto Dutch Hollow toward town. I shut the door, and I put my hand on that new brass tab and threw the deadbolt at 8 o'clock in the morning, which I have never done one time in 31 years in this house. The barn key was on the step Thursday morning where I left it, and gone by the time I got back. I wasn't here for any of it. I went over to Dot's at 7, and we sat on her porch with the space heater running and the radio going low. And she never asked me why I'd come at 7 in the morning, which tells you what kind of neighbour she is. A car came down Dutch Hollow around 9 and slowed at my drive and went on. I didn't watch it. Dot poured me another cup and told me about her granddaughter's centerpieces. The trucks came out Friday. Caesar drove the second one, and going past, he lifted 2 fingers off the wheel, and I lifted my hand. That was all there was to it. Nobody came to my door. I never spoke to that man from the insurance company, and I never spoke to anybody at the county, and I never picked up a telephone about any of it. Whatever that fellow found in my barn on Thursday, he found an empty barn and a house with nobody in it, and everything else took care of itself the way things do quietly. On paper, in offices, in other towns, over the next few weeks. The site package out of Coshocton went to an outfit in Fresno, Ohio, on account of the local address. The rewrite came back at a number he couldn't carry. He sold the second truck in April, and Caesar went to a paving crew out of Newark that pays him better, which Wade told me himself, and did not have to. So now he drives one truck and works it himself, 6 days, which is exactly what he was doing at 26 when he started. It isn't nothing. I know what it cost him, and I don't pretend otherwise. But it isn't the end of him either, and I'll say that to anybody who wants to make more of this than it was. Dale came out on a Sunday in March with my mail in a Kroger bag. He set it on the table, and then he couldn't seem to put it down. He kept his hand on it. There were 9 weeks of my life in that bag. A pharmacy statement, the credit union, 2 things from Medicare, a Christmas card from a woman I carried mail for, who didn't know it never reached me. I should have called you, he said. The first week of February. I had it in my hand. I told him I knew. I texted Wade instead. He sat down. You want to know the truth of why? I said I did. Because if you were slipping, then me not coming out here since October made sense. Somebody was watching you. Somebody had it. He looked at the table. It let me off. That's my son. He's not a hard man. He's a man who takes the road with the fewest turns in it, and that time it cost me something, and he knew it. And he said so out loud in my kitchen, which is more than most people ever do. I didn't tell him it was all right, because it wasn't. And I didn't hold it over him either. I asked him if he wanted tea. He said yes. We drank it. He came out the next Sunday, and the one after that. He's been coming since, most weeks, and he brings Owen sometimes, and the boy sits on my back step and throws gravel at the culvert, which is what his father did at that age. That's the repair, not the apology, the showing up. Cesar came up the drive one evening in the middle of March, at the end of a shift, still in his work clothes. He didn't say much. He put the key with the yellow tape on my kitchen table and pushed it across with 2 fingers. He hadn't been asked to. I hadn't sent word to anybody. I don't know how a man like that carries a thing like that around for 3 weeks, but he did, and then he brought it back. I poured him a cup at my own table, with the light on and the door unlocked, and my permission on it this time. He stayed 20 minutes. Marisol lost the other front tooth. I haven't seen him since. I don't expect to, that's all right. Wade called in April. I let it ring twice before I picked up, and there was that pause where neither of us knew who was supposed to start. He didn't apologize. I want to be clear about that. He has never apologized to me for one thing that happened in this house, and I have stopped waiting for it. What he said was, I knew what I was doing when I called Dale in November. And I said, I know you did. That was the call. Maybe 40 seconds of it. He said something about the weather, and I said something back, and we hung up. He calls on Saturdays now, before he comes. He doesn't call on Sundays anymore, and I have stopped waiting for the phone to ring. When he brings Brody, he waits down at the end of the drive with the truck running. Nobody sat down and negotiated that. He came the first Saturday in April and stopped at the road, and he has stopped at the road every Saturday since. Brody comes at 10 and goes at 3. I am not going to give up that boy over what his father did, and I am not going to hand anybody back a key either. Both of those things are true, and they sit fine together, and if somebody thinks I'm hard for it, that's their business. I've let go of the other thing. June took hold of my wrist in that hospital room and made me promise I wouldn't let Wade go under, and I have carried that for 14 years. It has cost me a bedroom, a barn, a mailbox, 3 months of not trusting my own hand on a stove ring, and very nearly my name. I've decided my sister asked me for more than she had any business asking. She was 53 years old, and she was dying, and she was scared for her son, and I don't hold 1 minute of it against her. But if you'd sat June Kimball down at this table with a cup in front of her and laid the whole business out the November part, the boy with the boots, the pillowcase, she'd have looked at me and said, Rennie, for God's sake, put it down. So I put it down. What I got back is small, and I would not trade it for anything. The hour between 4:45 and 6 in the morning is mine again. It has been mine since 1994. when I started getting up at that hour to case mail, and it stayed mine after they took the truck away, and for 3 weeks this winter it belonged to somebody else, and I didn't know it. Now it's just me and a cold kitchen and the light over the stove. I kept the kettle. I thought about a new one. I scoured it instead, inside and out, on a Tuesday, until my arm ached. It doesn't sit on the back burner anymore. I moved it up front on purpose, where the light off the window falls on it, because from the bottom of the stairs, before I'm all the way down, I can see it. And if it's where I left it, I know the whole house. Brody was here Saturday. He filled it at the tap himself and stood at that stove, with his hands behind his back like a soldier, watching it, not walking off. And when it went, he took it off the heat with both hands, arms locked out straight, tongue between his teeth. He set it on the trivet and looked at me. "That's how," I said. That night, I got out the notebook and wrote the date, and under it I wrote 14/7/10 Dutch Hollow, and after that I wrote the word I used to write on every house that had somebody living in it: occupied.